Um, I also just want to say thank you. I know a lot of people have put comments on the mural board, and I've seen people kind of reading through today as I was doing the same. So um, I think that tool is really helpful for our group to prepare presentations and prepare content for these meetings. So thanks to everyone who's been posting, and we'll do our best to cover a lot of those comments. Um, so last meeting, we talked about development ready lands, and we talked about partially vacant lands and land market supply factor. And we'll get back to those topics in the coming weeks. Today, our focus is complete neighborhoods. I remember we had a really robust conversation about these topics last year when we covered them, and looking forward to the conversation today. We reworked the agenda a little bit, so we're going to start with the affordable housing topic, um, and work through that. And then we'll be shifting to the neighborhood serving commercial and open space topics second. So we'll hear some presentations about each of these topics, and then we'll go directly to a poll, and then hear from our DLCD presenters again, and then open up for discussion. So with that, Maddie, I believe you're going to take us through our focus area and questions for today's meeting for the racial equity framework.
Thank you, Steve. Madeline Phillips, Public Facilities Planner here at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Today's racial equity framework focus area is historical inequities. This is a topic that seeks to identify and address issues that we've recognized in hindsight are potentially resolvable, or something that we can do to help mitigate for similar things happening again in the future. We recognize, first of all, that affordability and the completeness of neighborhoods often is not distributed equitably in all geographies of communities. And we very diligently are seeking ways to not just address that issue and enable more opportunity in more places, but also to increase the likelihood or chances that the urban form, when it is developed, does not perpetuate that inequity in terms of access for different groups of people. So the questions that we have within this portion of the agenda focus on ways that affordability and complete neighborhoods may support or lessen the inequities that we recognize in our communities, particularly in the access of opportunity by communities of color. And then secondly, thinking about mechanisms within our land use planning program that can help reduce those inequities. So as communities might continue to face certain kinds of adversity in accessing opportunity in particular places. In other words, maybe they're able to access housing in a place that doesn't have great amenity or access to the things that we know help complete a neighborhood, or are burdened in different ways, that we think about ways that our planning program can assist in reducing the exposure to those inequities. With that, I'll turn it back over to Steve, and thank everyone for considering those items as we move through the topics today.
Thank you very much for setting the framework for today's conversation. Now Jenna is going to walk us through some slides regarding affordable housing.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and thanks, Maddie. Good afternoon, everyone. Jenna Hughes, Housing and Growth Management Analyst with DLCD. Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate you taking the time. So on the topic of planning for affordability, as Steve talked about, we first discussed this topic last fall, where we talked about planning for affordability, not just in urbanizable areas at the time of annexation, but also in areas being added to the UGB. And so the memo goes through a draft approach for rules getting at this issue And if we could move to the next slide. This slide essentially summarizes what's in the memo. We heard Thanks. We heard about a multitude of examples and ideas and ways cities have successfully incorporated affordability into their planning processes, including through concept or master plans, annexation agreements, deed restrictions, and comprehensive plan policies that support affordable housing. There are existing precedents that have come from the legislature, most notably Senate Bill 1537, the one-time UGB edition, which includes as part of the requirements adopting a conceptual plan that includes a diversity of housing types and at least 30% of housing subject to affordability restrictions. There's also House Bill 4079, which is the Affordable Housing Pilot Program. And I know Damien previously shared about Ben's participation in that program and planning for affordable units. And it's also in our current rules under Division 8 as part of the Housing Production Strategy Program, where cities must take action to plan for needed housing and address fair housing issues as identified in their contextualized housing need. The proposed approach intends to apply a consistent affordability approach both in urbanizable areas in the UGB and in land added to the UGB through prioritizing affordability in the Goal 14 location factor analysis. And I'll be delving into this, delving into the specific language in the next slide. It also includes ensuring that the zoning and areas added to the UGB will plan for a mix of types as identified in a city's needed type mix. And this idea is to ensure that cities are connecting back to their contextualized housing need, which is something that cities may already be doing, but it sort of formalizes that connection. And the intent here is that a city may have a deficiency for one specific type of housing in their housing capacity analysis, but we wouldn't want a city to only zone for that type. And so we want to make sure that we have that cities are planning for a mix of zoning to encourage housing variety and housing choice and ensuring that there are opportunities for mixed income neighborhoods. And then lastly, this is something that the third bullet point in the middle column, this is something that is inherently already included in the existing rules, but the draft rules call it out as a specific piece of the locational analysis in the contextualized housing need, which is to do essentially a look back exercise on areas that have been added to the UGB within the last 3 HPS cycles. And if there are any fair housing issues that have been identified, then that should inform which actions a city takes in their HPS and where they should be concentrated. And guidance would focus on then directing cities to actions to help address those particular issues and promote affordability. Moving on to the next slide. This is a look at the particular draft language proposed related to Goal 14 location factors. And this also feeds into our next topic related to complete neighborhoods. So you'll see a lot of blending of affordability and complete neighborhoods. And so in applying, the draft rules state that in applying the Goal 14 location factor 1 and 2 listed on the right in that gray box for reference, the city must compare the relative efficiency of accommodating housing land needs, including affordable housing as identified in their contextualized housing need and housing capacity analysis. And this idea is getting at including a mix of housing types that are likely to be attainable for a range of income levels, and looking at how well does it match with the need that the city has identified. That second draft rule, subsection 11, states that in applying location factor 3, that the city may prioritize areas that have been conceptually planned to include a minimum percentage of affordable housing, as well as include commercial and open space. And this is in a similar vein as to what's in Senate Bill 1537 and the Affordable Housing Pilot Program. It is not mandatory, but is an attempt to clarify what cities may assess in their ESEE analysis. And I know we've had some activity on the mural board related specifically to this language around location factors. So I just want to acknowledge that I see those comments and thank you for contributing. And I'm hoping that my presentation so far has answered at least some of the questions that were on the mural board. But for now, I'm going to hand it back to Steve to, I believe, move us through the straw poll.
Yeah, I think you have a slide for that, don't you? Yeah.
Yes.
So, Ingrid, could you go ahead and pull up our straw poll, looking to hear level of support on the proposals that Jenna presented, and hopefully you all had a chance to read through. Let's see, how many people do we have here today? 1, 2, 3. About 12 people here today. So I'm going to give it another minute. We've had 10 people respond so far, a nice spread here. A couple people support as presented. The 5 people support with minor refinement. And then 3 people think we need some more discussion, a little more. So it feels like, 8 people feel like we're on the right track here. So that's good to hear. I think as we move from the poll to discussion, I'd like Jenna to kind of set the framework and maybe give us some specific questions that you would like to hear back from the group on.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and thanks everyone. Yeah, I see a lot of 2s, some 3s, a couple 1s. And so I think I had some specific discussion questions on the next slide, but I am also interested to hear what other refinements might be needed. But the questions are, does the draft approach align with TAC feedback and implement the legislative direction? Does it add clarity and certainty? And does it promote affirmatively furthering fair housing, kind of in line with our racial equity framework area of does it lessen historical inequities? And the second question is related specifically to the Goal 14 location factors language in, trying to balance being prescriptive versus flexible in rule. And so just want to ask the group whether the language is prescriptive enough to be able to be operationalized at the local level. So those are just a couple of questions that I wanted to ask the group.
Thanks, Jenna. Yeah, let's so a couple of things. If someone could drop those questions into the chat, and then we can take the PowerPoint down and see each other a little more clearly on, I know I have a small screen. And then we have the 2 questions that Jenna proposed, and certainly there's a lot of comments on the mural board. We're happy to have you raise those again here. We've certainly read through them all, but we want to hear from each of you on those. And then finally, particularly people who might have voted 3, given a 3. We certainly want to make space and time to hear from the folks who have the biggest concerns about what's been proposed. So I'm going to start with Ted. Why don't you get us going here, Ted?
Nope, thank you. I wasn't first to raise my hand, but I'll go ahead.
I have the ability to choose whoever I want, Ted. Today it's you.
So my comments are in the category of trying to sort out how this works in our metro region as opposed to cities elsewhere in the state. There are some references to local governments, and there's a definition that metro is included as a local government. So some of the language I guess leaves me with more questions about how it applies to metro as a local government. For instance, references to relying on contextualized housing need, which metro doesn't do. So things like that in the Division 240050 land inventory in response to deficiency, I think needs some clarification for metro at least.
All right. Thanks, Ted. Let's go to Mary Kyle and then to Brock.
Thank you. Yes, I was a 3 and I didn't look at the Miro board nor did I comment on it. So I apologize if I'm repeating anything that's on it, but I still have my questions. In the suggested language under new sub 10, it talks about the city must compare the relative efficiency of accommodating land needs, but I feel like compare it to what amongst all of the alternative sites they're looking at around an urban growth boundary, or only those that are in the same kind of category, like rural residential exception areas, because these rules can't change the priority scheme that's in statute. So that part is unclear to me. And then let me just add to that, what seems to be missing is the whole issue of where urban reserves fits into this. And I think urban reserves are actually more similar to the things you referred to in Senate Bill 1537 and House Bill 4079, because those like pre-identified, there's no alternative analysis for those areas. These are the areas, and urban reserves, that analysis has already been done. So I would think about some of these differently in the context of urban reserves than I would just a city without urban reserves. But I'm just not sure how we compare, how this comparison suggestion or proposed rule fits in with the priority scheme that's in statute.
Thank you, Mary Kyle. Jenna, did you have any responses to the question about
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And I did invite Kevin to jump in as well, but yeah, it does not change the priority scheme. You would be looking at alternatives areas within the same priority level.
Okay.
So yeah, you're right. High value farmland wouldn't automatically go to the top, for example.
Okay. All right. Well, that takes a lot of my exclamation points out of the margin of my notes. And then just how urban reserves, because I think that might change up some things. But anyway, I think, just in another section of it, I really like the idea of looking back to see for the past 3 cycles or 18 years, I think it was, how things have, how it's played out. And I think you said that's for meeting fair housing. And maybe it was for more things, but I'm familiar with areas that have been brought into urban growth boundaries as much as 20 years ago, but have not yet developed at all because they have not yet been annexed. So there's something, in addition to looking at, how did we do on developing that housing in those areas? How did we do on developing housing at all? Because that might bring into play whether expanding an urban growth boundary again is really the most effective way to meet our housing needs. So I wouldn't just look at I think it's a bigger issue of just how successful have those past 1, 2, 3 cycles of urban growth boundaries expansions been. I really like looking at for contextualized housing need and fair housing, but also just at all.
Great. Thanks, Mary Kyle.
Thank you.
Jenna, any comments on the urban reserves question? If not, we can keep moving and get back to that another time.
I don't, unless others
Well,
on the team do.
and maybe if you're looking in the same priority level, that might answer it because they're in the first priority,
Mhm.
and that might just answer it there. I just didn't see the word urban reserve. So anyway, thanks.
Mary Kyle, can you remind me when we come back with version 2 of our urban reserves? Just I might reach out to you to see how these two different rules talk
Talk to each other. Right. Okay.
Because we're doing
Thanks.
quite a bit. I know Heather from Eugene asked us to really look at Division 24. There's a few sections in there that we want to look at consistency with Division 21. So I flagged it, but if folks want to remind me, that'd be great.
Thanks, everyone. Let's go to Brock.
Yeah, I have a lot, and I'm going to have a lot at the RAC meeting next week as well. One thing I do agree with Mary Kyle with is that, yes, we do need to be looking at lands that have not been served or been annexed or anything like that in 20 years. There's actually some existing language in Division 38 for the simplified UGB expansion process, Rule 200, subsection 6. I think you could very easily bring that into the Division 24 process, so that if something has been in your urban growth boundary for 20 years and it has not been served, or like Mary Kyle said, it hasn't been annexed, you get to take that out and you get to swap it with new land, or you get to discount the capacity of it. That one's going to be really important. Additionally, I am very uncertain about why A and B were added to the contextualized housing need rule. I'm not really even sure what that's intended to accomplish, and that makes me a little bit nervous. Additionally, I'm pretty sure our entire CHN through the HPS, that's dedicated to make sure that we are zoning for the types of housing that we need, right? And we've done a lot of work on infill and development. This should not be a one-to-one when you expand. It has to be exactly the kind of zoning that goes out, right? Generally speaking, like that is just going to happen if cities are actually caring about what they're doing here. They are going to zone it to allow for the types of housing that they have told you that they're going to produce. So I'd like a little bit more clarity on the intent of that as well. But you're right, it should be zoned to allow all those different types that do need to be built. Beyond that, I am a little still concerned with the two additions for the goal 14 locational factors. For number 10, I'm questioning whether the word efficiency is related to cost efficiency or land efficiency, because it's not specified, and everything else in the department's rules seem to be about land efficiency. And so I want to make sure that this is in fact cost efficiency for affordable housing, because we need to make it affordable. And then for number 11, that is way too prescriptive. It is not prescriptive enough. What that should say, everything should be removed after conceptually planned to, and then you just say reflect the housing needs identified in the city's contextualized housing needs analysis. You don't need to set specific requirements for how many of these are regulated affordable, how many of these are commercial, et cetera, et cetera. Let cities determine what they are going to do. They are terrified to end up in the acceleration program. Give them the latitude to respond to their needs. I'm so tired of everything being a goal 3 conversation and then, having a goal 3 focus group to talk about how we should be treating our urban growth boundaries with not a single RAC member on them. Oh, and a developer and lending focus group that didn't include banks or credit unions or the builders. You guys have a lot of work to do here. I'm really tired of this, and I'm sorry that I'm in a bad mood, and I apologize if I'm coming off as rude, but you got to understand, we're just not going to get anything done. We're really not. And I'm so sorry, because I know you guys have been working hard on this staff team, and I don't mean to take away from your passion or your intent or anything like that, but my God, we got to do something, and I'm just mad.
Thanks for your comments, Brock. It sounds like maybe some issues to talk with staff about offline. But I want to go back to Jenna. Brock had a clarifying question about the contextualized housing A and B Is there anything you want to say to clarify the intent of those pieces?
Yeah, thanks for that. So that is that is getting at that concept of doing a look back on what the zoning ended up being in areas that were brought in to the UGB over the past 3 cycles. And the intent is that cities, if there's an issue identified, a city will then take action in their HPS. And that's where that's in that locational analysis, so that cities can select actions that are maybe focused in a particular location if needed.
Thanks, Jenna. Let's go to Damien.
Thanks, Steve. I think I had one question answered on 10, the new 10 on page 8 of our memo. One thing I was going to recommend, though, is in terms of looking at whether you can, looking at the relative efficiency of accommodating housing land needs, including affordable housing. One of the things that would be helpful with guidance is looking at maybe costs a little bit more broadly, especially when it comes to affordable housing, because I think one of the things that we've become more aware of as we've looked at these kind of developments is that while some interests would like to see us require more affordable housing, we've had to be kind of set expectations differently to look at what could potentially be developed that could be either subsidized through housing or other development on a site in an area, or through funding, like low-income housing tax credits. So one thing I'm trying to express, maybe not perfectly, is that's something to be thinking about if we're looking at incorporating some of our affordable housing need in an expansion area, which is also related to my comment, I think, or question on number 11. This is something where I'd recommend looking at maybe some sites around the state to see what percentage of affordable housing has been included in a given development. I know, for example, we've had more than one where like 30% was the standard that, if somebody was going to look at affordable housing in an area, at least that much, because that might be more likely to get funded either through maybe Oregon Housing Community Services, low-income housing tax credits, or maybe other sources. So it's something I know a little bit about, but maybe not enough to be useful today. So I just wanted to raise the issue.
Appreciate that, Damien. Thank you. Martha.
Hey there, thanks. I have a couple of questions coming from a perspective of a county in Metro. I hear I hear Ted, and I think you really do need to consider how this would apply in Metro. He identified one area. Also in the new number 10, it says a city must compare the relative efficiency as identified in the city's contextualized housing need. And so to the extent that Metro has to comply with this, that doesn't make sense. But I'm also curious how, and maybe there's a way to do this, but how do you assess efficiency of accommodating affordable housing? Because there's no zoning for affordable housing. We at the jurisdiction level don't control what housing is sold or rented for, unless there's some sort of, inclusionary zoning type requirement. I'm just curious as a practical matter how that is done, and I could argue anywhere where housing is allowed, it's zoned to include affordable housing. And so I'm curious if this is necessary in here at all. And then number 11 is also confusing to me. And maybe there are areas that are conceptually planned to include regulated affordable housing, but again, unless it's mandated, how do you know? And if something is conceptually planned, that tells me it's not really, it's conceptually planned. It's not necessarily on a site-by-site basis planned. So I'm just kind of curious how these two new factors or criteria would actually work, and if they are doing what they are intended to do. I also had a question on number 2, way up on page 5, under contextualized housing need, about adding current zoning and 18 years of whatever it is, urban growth boundary expansion or what have you. Again, you need to think about, it's not just cities that control their own urban growth boundary that are doing these kinds of analyses. And so I'm not quite sure what those factors are trying to do. And so I'll have to think through that, but I also just want you to think through it and figure out if that's really going to do what you are intending it to do in all contexts, meaning urban unincorporated areas, metro, cities with their own UGBs. So
Thanks.
those are,
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Martha, for continuing to bring the county perspective forward and the county within metro perspective. That's helpful to keep us thinking about that. Regarding your questions about 10 and 11, I think our DLCD team could give some responses to those questions. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I might ask, I know Kevin has a lot of experience of reviewing various city examples, and so you might have some perspective on how cities are interpreting location factor 1, which is related to the efficient accommodation of land need.
Well, and I think specifically, I think this is something we talked about, which is how I think Martha was getting at, like, how do you know, that an area is going to efficiently accommodate affordable housing, which is the concept we're adding here, right? Kevin, you have something to?
Yeah, I guess I do, but I do think that this, as it's written, might kind of lead to a little bit of overlap with factor 1, which typically does look at like service costs, serviceability costs. In terms of efficiency to accommodate housing land needs, ways to provide more affordable units, one of those ways is to, reduce infrastructure costs. It's not the same. It's not a one-to-one relationship. There may be other considerations here that I'm not thinking of, but that's, to me, the most obvious link there. The other thing I want to point out between 10 and 11 is that 11 is not mandatory, it's a may. City may prioritize those areas. That's an important distinction, I think. It's basically giving a city an ability to make that a priority if they wish to, as part of that Goal 14 balancing.
Okay. All right. Any other DLCD comments on or for clarity on 10 and 11 per Martha's? Yeah, Maddie.
Yeah, thanks all for your comments, and I appreciate you highlighting these. I think just to give a little bit more perspective of where the DLCD team was coming from in writing, particularly number 10, and the way that it may overlap with some of the location factor language, is that what is unknown right now, or maybe unknown to this group in detail, is the format and material that may come out of the contextualized housing need. And what we're hoping to do is show that reflected in rule, that the considerations that a community results in at the conclusion of a contextualized housing need can be considered in the process of the analysis and applying location factors. So some of the language may sound redundant in that, sure, communities are going to do an efficiency analysis of serviceability in location factor 2. In location factor 1, it's an efficient use of land. And I think what we're trying to do is refine that statement to some extent to include housing, whether that's housing as your community defines it, at certain income levels and certain scales, types, locations, and characteristics that come out of a city's contextualized housing needs. So if there's a way we can better word that to speak directly to that component of the goal 10 process that could inform this, those types of recommendations would be greatly appreciated.
All right, let's move on to Al.
Thank you, Steve. And I just want to say, first off, I know I had a lot of the comments on the mural board, so apologies to everybody for that. But I do want to say I really do appreciate the fact that where things are going, we're seeing a real recognition in the draft that that goal 10 is relevant to the selection process when you are looking at the balancing factors and the need. Those are all good things. I don't think we are anywhere close to where we need to be in how we get that into rule, however. That's why I voted number 3. So that's kind of the boo and the yay. I guess that's a yay and a boo, isn't it? So my first concern is that we're dealing with, I think as Ethan said in his presentation to the commission last week, that unlike some of the other things, the other rulemakings, this is one that actually is going back and dealing with Goal 14, with HB 2709, and with the goals as they've existed for a long time. There's a lot of history here. Some of it's good history, some of it's bad history, but some of that history is court cases telling us, what we can and can't do. And some of that court history I agree with, and some of I don't. But I think we have to recognize that as confusing as it is, and as partially wrong as it may be, we're operating within those constraints. And one of those constraints, I think, goes to the somewhat prescriptive, I think as Brock called it, too prescriptive and also too narrow language about what you may or may not do in doing your balancing process. There have been a couple court cases where the court has basically said, no DLCD, you cannot, by rule or otherwise, you can't put a thumb on the scale of that balancing process. And I'd have to disagree with Kevin a little bit. When you say you may do something, the negative implication is if you do less than that or something different than that, it isn't what you may do. A may is a may not in that context. And that's what the courts would say. So I think we just can't have that. I also think that the way in which the balancing process has evolved in the court cases, it really is a kind of process which is not one where you can actually provide a lot more clarity. And you don't really want to provide that here because you need to leave room for some local creativity and for some local discretion and for some local fact finding. And that's all what the statutes require right now. So I would say right now, the way that's worded is it's just not legal. So I would just get rid of that and recognize that there are going to be a lot of things that would go into that balancing process under the ESEE factors, and you can't cover them with 20 pages of rules, I wouldn't say. The other thing that I'm a little concerned about is I don't understand quite how what Bend did in using the ESEE analysis, the factor 3 analysis, somehow got subtracted from and ported over into efficiency. It looks like the equity piece got kind of sucked out of the ESEE process, and I'm not quite sure how that happened. And I think and I don't know quite why it is, allocated between factors 2 and 3 in the way that the rule does. So I need some clarification on that. And then finally, I've been spending a lot of time the last week rereading the court cases, the McMinnville case, the petition for review in that case, which pointed out that what the Court of Appeals said in that case was a theory that Thousand Friends didn't argue, that DLCD didn't argue, that the city of McMinnville didn't argue, and it involved goals that have changed since then. I don't know if Mary Kyle feels comfortable understanding how all that works these days. I certainly don't, and I don't know if we can straighten that out without going back to the legislature. So that's just kind of where I'll stop.
Thank you, Al. Let's go to Alexandra. And I did note that you had a question for clarification. So we'll kind of see if we can get back to that when we give DLCD staff another chance to chime in. Alexandra?
I don't know that I can say it better than Al on my thoughts on 11. I have a lot of concerns about even kind of permissive language of this nature in a lot of these rules. I think when we talk about rules that potentially will lead to cities getting referred to HEPO and to acceleration and all of those things, rules like this make me incredibly nervous because they are simultaneously very prescriptive, not prescriptive enough, and just not really based in, especially the case of 11, on kind of what cities conceptualize or contextualize housing needs analysis may have said, things like that, and really kind of limit what our communities can do. And it may be permissive in writing, but I don't think in terms of actual implementation, that's what we're likely to see. And that leads to a lot of concern that we're just boxing cities in and not allowing them to take more creative paths. So a lot of concerns, kind of, especially with 11. I think a lot of the explanation around 10 has helped. Still have some concerns about the words relative efficiency of affordable housing uses. I think we need to clarify whether we're talking cost or land use, because to me, cost for affordable housing should be kind of the gold standard when we're talking about use, because you can say that this is a great use of land to have it be affordable housing, but that doesn't mean it's actually going to be affordable to develop. And when we're talking about affordable to housing, that is the number one thing that's going to prevent you from seeing it develop, is how much it costs, not whether or not you have land for it. So a lot of concerns, and then I'll just put the same flag in the sand that Brock did earlier about concerns about some of those OHNA focus groups that occurred, and some of the deeply concerning and misleading feedback that they gave that has been published now.
All right, let's go to Casera and then Heather.
Yeah, I had a kind of clarifying question about 11 on the locational factors. I know we're talking a lot about affordable housing, but I was curious what the thought was behind putting a limit on the open space, right? And in theory, cities are going to have to demonstrate that this is for, meeting their housing need. And have we observed problems with that in the past where expansion areas are providing too much open space? I can also think of a couple examples, at least in Washington County, where expansion areas are potentially going to be sites for new kind of regional or community type of parks. And so through what those unintended consequences might be, would you be only able to provide kind of neighborhood pocket parks if you had this really prescriptive maximum percentage of acreage for open space?
Thanks, Casera. We'll go to Heather, and then we'll give staff a chance to answer any of the clarifying questions, and then we'll go to Brock and Mary Kyle, and it'll probably be about time to move on to our next topic. Heather?
Sure. I had the same question about open space, and the same comments that Casera made about whether it's really necessary to put a bookend for that. Similarly, on 11, regarding the 80% AMI threshold and below, we've actually found that moderate income housing is even more difficult to get because there are a lack of subsidies available for moderate income housing. So yeah, I hear what Brock was saying earlier about kind of taking that part out. And I can understand why you're wanting to put bookends in there. And so I'm wondering also, yeah, I'm just not sure. But if you were going to keep that part in, I think I would recommend increasing it to below 120% AMI to get that priority in there. And then for 10, support, we also was going to ask about the clarification of, is this about including affordable housing, capital A, or is this about being able to analyze the affordability of housing for an expansion area. I'll just mention that this came up when we did our urban reserves, wanting to be clearly able to analyze how an area might have really expensive utility extensions, poor transportation connections, and all of that impacts the cost of housing. And then I'm hearing some about like 10 being, it says the city must compare, so maybe it's just more making it an allowance and making it clear that you can do that in the analysis rather than requiring it. I don't know. Just trying to find a potential option there. So thank you.
Thanks, Heather. So pause here to see if Jenna or anyone else. I see Kevin, you have some. Go ahead.
I just want to respond to the park issue that's been raised, parks open space. So the reason we're moving forward with this proposal is that the rules already allow cities to identify site-specific public land needs. We've seen a few park-based UGB expansions decisions recently. Almsville and Roseburg are two examples I can recall within the last few years. So there is the safe harbor that says, hey, when you're looking at residential lands, you can also factor in this 25% to pick up, what a lot of cities consider to be like neighborhood scale parks. So I need a park within walking distance of my new neighborhood. There is also a mechanism for cities to plan for and expand UGBs for regional park needs that are identified in parks master plans, in the same way that cities can identify needs for other public infrastructure facilities. So we didn't feel that the rules really needed to be amended because that ability is present under the current rules.
Thanks, Kevin. Ethan?
Thanks. Hi, Al and others. I'm curious if you can help me out with something that you said about this number 11 in terms of it being prescriptive. I think when we look at or too prescriptive in terms of in the context of location factor 3, the consideration of all of those factors and saying that the city, in consideration of those factors, may prioritize areas that achieve this particular social outcome, affordable housing at a particular AMI below. How would that be, how would that, one, not meet that kind of criteria, and two, be too prescriptive? I'm curious if we could dive into that a little bit more.
We'll go to Al and then Brock, we'll get to you next.
Okay, thanks for the question, Ethan. My feeling about it is there's no lower or upper limit there. If somebody comes in and they say, I'm a church, and if we come in, we're going to do this deed restriction, or we've done this deed restriction, or somebody comes and says, I'm going to build a park, or whatever it is. You don't, under goal 14, the balancing factors, local jurisdictions do not have a choice not to consider that. They have to consider all relevant ESEE factors. And you can't, by setting a threshold for it, say these are the only types of ESEE factors you consider, or the only levels of ESEE factors. It's supposed to be a balancing process. And what the course has said is there's not a threshold. It's not like a standard you have to meet, but you can't just basically say there's a categorical exclusion or limit. If it turns out it's not bound by anything credible, somebody says I'll do this, but he hasn't recorded a deed restriction, you can say I don't believe you. Or the commission or LUBA can say this isn't sufficient because it's only a statement of intent. But it might be any of a million other kinds of things that are there. And so to call out one creates a category error, and to say what that one has to be is a magnitude error. So it's got both of those in it, and I don't think the goal allows you to do that.
All right, let's go to Brock and then Mary Kyle and then Alexandra, and then we'll move on to our next topic.
Alexandra, is yours on the same topic? Okay, I'll let you jump ahead of me and then I'll go from there.
I'll just kind of underline on the like 11 being too prescriptive, and specifically looking at the regulated affordable housing serving levels below 80% AMI and kind of tie it back to what Heather said about how hard it is to build like 120% AMI housing. That, not to say that we do not need more regulated affordable housing. We 100% do, but not having it directly tied back to kind of what your conceptualized housing need is and what it is exactly that you are struggling to build or may need most in this particular expansion or whatever that is, just makes it more difficult to plan for what your community actually needs, rather than planning for kind of this nebulous, it is the goal that we should all be striving for, but it may not, we have 241 different cities in Oregon. It's not going to be a straight across all of them. That, those are the needs. And so putting these like really concrete caps saying that, all communities should be striving for 80% AMI or below, when, some of our communities may have a greater need tied to 120.
Okay.
Yep. I will echo everything that Alexandra and Al said. I'd also like to note that I can't tell the way that this rule is written if the X's that are there are meant to be placeholders that are going to be filled in by the department, or if those are choices that the city gets to make. I would push even a little bit further and say that maybe we should go up to 130% AMI. If you talk to the home builders, they will tell you that that is not cost effective to build right now either. The other thing that I would say here is that, specifically with this language, X% of regulated affordable housing. Okay, let's say that we have a larger acreage site, let's say 20 acres, right? And we have regulated affordable housing there, and we have all the money coming from the state to help fund different things, right? Placeholder for the rule or for the city? Sorry, Jenna, I saw your comment in the chat, but I wasn't sure which that refers to. Is it a placeholder that the department fills, or is it a placeholder that the city fills? The department? Yes. Okay. Yeah, that would be very uncomfortable. But additionally, so let's say the regulated affordable housing example. Let's say there's state money that goes into providing some of the infrastructure for that project. Based on what we've seen in recent rulings from BOLI, that entire 20-acre project is now going to be subject to prevailing wage, and there goes all your affordability. We need to think further than 2 inches in front of our nose when we're writing these rules. I'm sorry, but there is a lack of foresight in a lot of this that I just cannot explain. And there's also a lack of retrospect into what we're supposed to be doing, providing clarity and certainty in the adoption and amendment of HCAs, urban growth boundary amendments, urban growth exchanges, or urban reserves, right? Reducing analytical burden, minimizing procedural redundancy, increasing legal certainty, with the exception of the land market supply factor, and only partially because that still only covers partially vacant land, even though every single person in this room has acknowledged that not all vacant land develops in a 20-year planning period. I have not seen one thing in these CowTac rules that reduces analytical burden, reduces procedural redundancy, and increases legal certainty. How about a safe harbor to protect you from an appeal when you expand your UGB? We put safe harbors on everything else. Why can't we do it here? And I know there's some people in the room that are going to disagree about that, and one of them is going to speak next. But really? Really? Come on. Let's actually take this seriously and go with the direction that the legislature gave us instead of just what we want to do.
Right. I'm going to just remind everyone that this is a process. It's an iterative process. We hear from you. We propose rules. We get feedback today. The purpose of today is to get feedback. And I appreciate hearing people's feedback so that staff can then take that and prepare a version 2. And let's not cast intent on what people are trying to do. Everybody's working hard here to get something that works. Mary Kyle.
Thanks. I think my comments are partly being less prescriptive and then more prescriptive in a different case. So I think on sub 11, it feels too focused on just the UGB expansion part of it and too prescriptive, because at least when I think about this, I think a city, in order to be looking at a UGB expansion, for housing that includes housing, they have to have shown that they can't meet their housing need as allocated. Now we have an OHNA allocation process for total housing need and by income levels. And that they've justified a UGB expansion for residential use based on the inability to meet that housing need inside their urban growth boundary. And so they need an additional land supply to meet that. And I look at meeting that need as a citywide obligation so that, and that the UGB expansion plays a part of that. So as I think Jenna said in her opening presentation, we're not going to try to meet it for a variety of practical reasons. It doesn't make sense to try to meet all of a city's needs for housing at 30% under AMI in a UGB expansion. That's not fair and it's not practical in a lot of ways. But how does that UGB expansion contribute to it? It might be, for example, zoning at a density that provides the possibility of funding for affordable housing. And we know that funding for affordable housing, whether it's a state or a federal bucket, there's going to have to be a certain level of zoning that's has to be possible there for it to even unlock the possibility of money coming from those places. So to me, it is how does a city justify this UGB expansion based on meeting its overall housing needs, the numbers, the fair housing, et cetera, and then they build into that UGB expansion the conditions for that residential development. And those might be very prescriptive. I think Bend, I don't want to speak for Al or Damien here, but I have the impression Bend has been more prescriptive in those lands that have come into the UGB about how much affordable housing. There's that thumbs up from Al. So at that point, they actually are really pretty prescriptive about what that housing, how much of that housing has to be for affordable housing. But it's so if a city says we need a UGB expansion because we need this mix of housing in the future, and our UGB expansion is going to contribute to it in this way, I want to hold their feet to the fire that that they're going to put the zoning and the other tools in place to make sure that happens for that city that's going to meet their needs. So that's kind of maybe that to me is when the prescriptive part comes in. But in the beginning, it's just this, how does this fit into the overall city's housing needs? So I'm not sure if that was clear, but so it's both less prescriptive, it's more like individualized and localized to a city, as opposed to writing something like 11 is. I really appreciate the intent here. But I think we just might have a different way, or I'm thinking about it in a different way.
Great. Thanks, Mary Kyle. Thanks, everyone, for your thoughts on this topic, on the affordability topic. Jenna, I'm going to pass it back to you to shift us to thinking about neighborhoods serving commercial and open space.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I
Sorry,
think
Jenna. I'm so sorry, Steve. I'm
Go
wondering
ahead.
if I could jump in here quick. I think I just want to highlight real quick because these conversations are really important. I think when we are attempting to put things in front of this group, it is for exactly this kind of conversation of like, I hear the intent of what we're trying to accomplish, but I disagree that this is how we would achieve that intent. And so it's been a little bit of a tense meeting, so I just want to like put that all on the table and just highlight that, these are the kind of conversations that are really important to this process, because these are draft versions of these things, and we continue to have this conversation. We hear the input and come back to you all with further refinement around that intent. And so, I just want to kind of highlight that, the continuation of these kind of conversations is really important in this process.
Thanks, Ethan. Okay, Jenna.
Thank you. And yeah, reminder, this is version 1. So, we will come back later with a version 2, and we hope that this discussion informs some of those amendments. So continuing, we started talking about complete neighborhoods in our last discussion related to affordability. So it's a related topic. And you'll remember last year when we talked about complete neighborhoods, we shared an example in Beaverton, where and an approach to plan for commercial uses to support the neighborhood. And we also talked about the current safe harbor that exists in Division 24 that is specific for small cities. We didn't talk in detail last year about parks and open space, but that's another important element of a complete neighborhood that we want to make sure we're bringing into the discussion as well. So if we could go to the next slide. So this is, again, a snapshot of what was in the memo that went out. So in addition to the commercial safe harbor, there is an existing safe harbor for parks and schools, which Kevin talked about earlier. And when urbanizable land is then zoned inside the UGB, there are also opportunities to accommodate land for non-residential uses. But this generally relies on cities doing some sort of analysis, be that an economic opportunities analysis, market analysis, or relying on their parks plan to determine that percentage. The proposed changes expand the current commercial safe harbor to all cities, regardless of size. And this approach is then duplicated for land inside the UGB at the point of zoning. And I also just want to call out that when I first sent out the packet last Thursday, there was some text that was not showing up as track changes under Division 8, Section 0120. And so I just want to note that a corrected version was uploaded Monday morning at around 8 a.m. So if anyone happened to look at the memo over the weekend, the corrected version was posted earlier this week. So apologies for any confusion. So I just wanted to note that. And then lastly, we also talked about this in the affordability discussion, but allowing cities to prioritize areas that are conceptually planned for commercial and parks. And then if we could go to the next slide, which has a specific draft rule language that I wanted to draw attention to related to the commercial safe harbor. This is amended to specify commercial to serve the neighborhood in particular, but it does not limit the types of uses. And an economic opportunities analysis would not be required. So this with the goal of reducing analytical burden for cities. And there's also a 5% cap proposed. And this is intended to avoid oversized commercial in areas that may be drawing more of a regional traffic as opposed to for the neighborhood. But if a city had an economic opportunities analysis that said otherwise, they could go beyond that cap. This is just one optional pathway for cities. So I think then, Martha, I see your hand, but I'm gonna hand it back to Steve. I think we'll go into poll and then discussion and questions.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide, which probably cues up the poll. But Ingrid, why don't you go ahead and pull up the poll for this topic? I'll give everybody a chance to weigh in on where they are with the proposed rules for neighborhood serving commercial and open space. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Let's do the poll. And then Damian, we're going to move to your presentation in just a moment. All right, pretty similar to last time. We've got some indications that the intent is headed in the right general direction, but a few folks think that some significant more work or discussion is required, and we'll get to those comments in momentarily. But first, I want to hand it to Damian. He's got a few slides to help us better understand this topic.
Thanks, Steve. I actually don't have a slide presentation.
Oh, sorry if there's no slides. My bad.
No, earlier this week, I was reading the rules. I sent on an email to the housing team after looking at some of our expansion areas just to see how much of our expansion area was in commercial commercial land. And they varied from, 2% to up to about 10%. One area, for example, our Southeast expansion area, we added or had designated around 40 acres of land, I think, for commercial zoning and commercial plan designated land. Not just for neighborhoods serving commercial though, but because this was part of the city where there was no actually commercial land. There was no other places for grocery shopping or gas stations or what have you. So one of the goals was to provide land in an area where, as the area built out, hopefully would attract additional commercial development that would serve the area and save people trips, either to Highway 97 to the west or Highway 20 to the north to, meet their basic needs. So that was really more like kind of food for thought and comparison. I know we found it challenging trying to right size these areas because, for example, not an expansion area, but an area near one of our expansion areas was a corner. If you're ever in Bend and you see the corner of, I think it's the southwest corner of 27th and Reed Market Road, there's a commercial development there. There's some restaurants, a gas station, Cascade Lakes Brewery. That site's about 3 acres, and it was designated as a convenience commercial site about 20 years ago. So it takes time to get enough households to support something even like more neighborhood level. So just wanted to add that as, kind of food for thought. One thing I want to mention when we talk about this topic of areas that have been brought inside the UGB and how they develop or not, we have 11 expansion areas right now in Bend. 8 of those have been either master planned or area planned. 7 of those are actually annexed and developing as we speak. So more to look at as you're doing the rules in terms of just what our experience has been.
Thanks for that context, Damian. That's helpful. I know we certainly want to hear from folks with the threes. If you haven't raised your hand yet, we're going to start with Martha. Not that you voted a 3, but we're starting with you.
No, I didn't vote a 3. I have a number of comments and I have to leave a few minutes early, so I was trying to just get at the front of the queue, and I succeeded. So I agree. I think that neighborhood commercial should be allowed and not to be included in residential areas without having to redo an EOA. I think that it's important. I have some nitpicky comments, I guess, about some of this proposed language, and then one bigger one, and I'll try to get through it pretty quickly. Just starting with the definition, which is on page 4. When you are defining something as close proximity or using that term in the definition, you're going to have to define it, because otherwise you're going to hear everything from a half mile to 5 miles away, right? Everyone's interpretation. And I'm a little curious about the optimally assets should be or would be within 1/2 mile walking distance or within 2 mile bicycling distance. It seems like if it's within 2 mile bicycling distance, it would necessarily be within a 1/2 mile walking distance. And so I'm not quite sure what was intended with that. So those are those little nitpicky comments. I have a comment about starting on page 6, number 6, the definition of neighborhood serving commercial. I'm curious why you added mixed use in there, because mixed use isn't necessarily commercial. It can contain commercial. I think it just needs to be removed. I think assuming mixed use is allowed in that district, I don't think it needs to be in there, and it is confusing. Right above it, number 3, when you're saying residential land may accommodate a deficit of neighborhood serving commercial, I'm not sure how you would figure out if there's a deficit. Are you intending that if there's a deficit citywide, you can accommodate it somewhere else? It seems a little counterintuitive, because your neighborhood commercial is only supposed to serve your commercial. So I think I would look at that language. But my big issue is under land need, the little b, where you're changing the safe harbor. I think this is a really substantive change for small cities. And unless I'm interpreting it incorrectly, currently under the rules, a city with a population of less than 10,000 or less, can assume any retail, service, commercial land needs as a percentage of their population growth. And with this change, they can only assume the neighborhood commercial, and you're taking away a safe harbor for a small city to just use this percentage of direct population growth to assess how much overall commercial land they need, unless I'm interpreting it incorrectly. Again, I don't disagree with adding this safe harbor, but I think that you need to add it without taking away this option for small cities. I think it's a pretty substantive change. I'm almost done. Oh, and then we get down to the X that we had talked about a little bit before on the top of the next page. And number 6 right below it. I'm a little confused why we need the X in there, because I feel like the 6 right below it says the same thing. It says you have to zone appropriately based on your need. But also in changing 6 below it to put only contextualized housing need and housing capacity analyses, I think you're missing something, because that number 6 is actually for all lands. I think it includes employment lands too. And so I would just caution you not to exclude employment lands there unintentionally. But I don't think that, I don't know, I don't think you need X and 6. I think they say the same thing. And that's all I've got to say right now.
Thanks, Martha. And I saw a lot of those, whether it was you or someone else in the mural board as well. I don't know. We don't have any other hands up right now. I don't know if Jenna or any of the other staff, go ahead, want to respond to those. We got Damien. Why don't you go, and then we'll see if there's any responses from the team.
So go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Damien. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I had a few comments on the proposed 6. I too think it's a good idea. I think one of the things that would help is clarifying the relationship between the neighborhood commercial lands that may be designated here and their relationship to your EOA. And either clarify that these are going to be in addition to, or could be based in part on meeting some of your need, or that they're totally separate. And I had one additional question. I just lost it here. Oh, I think on page 6 under the proposed changes to B, where the proposed rule refers to no more than 5% of the deficit of net buildable acres. I think that needs to be clarified if that's a 5% of your total deficit, or is it 5% of the deficit that you may be meeting in a certain area? And, if I'm missing something, I'll let the team, correct me here, but I wanted to raise a couple issues there, because I think this is a concept worthy of exploring, especially with trying to plan for complete communities, but also trying to raise the issues so that we can reduce or eliminate any kind of legal risks between a city trying to provide some neighborhoods serving commercial and making sure that it's not going to run afoul of their obligations to meet their employment land needs after they've identified those with their EOA.
Thanks, Damien. Jenna, Maddie, Jenna.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments, Damien and Martha. I think, Damien, you both pointed out language that probably could be clarified in the next draft. So I appreciate you making note of that, the lack of clarity. I did want to respond, Martha, to your comment about changing the language from retail and service commercial to neighborhood serving commercial. Part of the reason we did that, why we proposed that in this version of rules, is that retail and service commercial is actually not defined in rule. And so we kind of had a conversation about, well, should we define retail and service commercial? And we thought, well, it's actually, we're aiming to serve the neighborhood. And so maybe we create a new definition around neighborhood serving commercial that is more about design standards rather than the specific use of what is in that commercial.
So I do understand that. I think you need to take a look at what might be taken away from a small city with this change.
Okay.
Because I think in my mind, the definition of retail and service commercial land is actually much broader. And if I was a small city, I would have potentially used this safe harbor just to identify commercial needs. I think, I'm not sure, but I just think about what you might be taking away unintentionally by narrowing down the type of commercial that you can do this for.
Yeah. Thanks, Martha.
Mhm.
Heather.
Thank you. I also apologize for being very active on the Miro board. So I'm not going to go through most of those comments, but a couple of the ones that I thought were more substantive. So under 120 plan designation, the new number 3, residential land may accommodate a deficit of neighborhood serving commercial. So but elsewhere, we're putting potentially a percentage, the 5% cap. And so I was wondering, was this added so would allow you to go above the whatever cap there might be added somewhere else to just make it clear? Because I would have assumed that, I mean, you have to demonstrate what your land what your land expansion is meeting, and so whether or not if you have a deficit, an actual deficit of neighborhood serving commercial, that would be identified in your EOA, and so you should be able to accommodate that wherever you can justify that makes sense for accommodating that land. I think the 5% cap provision is saying, like you said, an EOA isn't required to allow you to do the neighborhood commercial to make a complete neighborhood. So I just worried that this would make it more confusing that yeah, just that they're kind of pointing at each other and potentially making it more confusing. So just suggesting to look at that a little bit. And then also under X, so I also wasn't clear if this was broader than just the expansion area. But regardless, I like Martha's idea of scrapping that if it's not necessary, because I think we get back into that question about, do we really need to say what we're zoning the expansion area for when it already says elsewhere that your expansion has to demonstrate that you're meeting whatever your deficit is in from your CHN and your HCA. So I just, again, not sure that it's adding more clarity by adding that. Conversely, I thought, well, maybe this was added because it's trying to say, accommodate whatever your deficit is in the expansion area, and the rules will also allow you to expand for more housing types than your deficit is needed for in order to make a complete neighborhood. I'm assuming that was not the intent, but I actually kind of liked it, if that is the intent. So I just thought I would kind of throw that out there, because I think that is true, that when we're talking about complete neighborhoods and aging within your neighborhood and all of these things, it is not just about neighborhood commercial and parks and open space. It's about providing a variety of housing types. So anyway, I just wasn't sure on those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Before we go to Al, Jenna, did you have any clarity you wanted to provide on either the use of the term deficit or that section, the intent of that section X? And it's okay if it's just no, we'll.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that, but
Okay.
thanks for flagging it, Heather.
Perfect. Thanks, Martha and Heather on those. Al, go ahead, and then we're almost at
Yeah,
time.
thanks, Steve. And it's really kind of a sort of a cross question for Heather, I guess, a little bit. I'm not sure I understand all of this, but I am aware that the Eugene Springfield Metro Plan has a fairly generous allocation of 32%, which is added in on all residential lands analyses, or used to be. It's in the Metro Plan. That included such a very wide range of uses, including neighborhood commercial. And I had to litigate that issue in the Riverbend Hospital case, where we did succeed in persuading the Court of Appeals that a regional hospital was not a neighborhood use. So that was helpful. But the fact is that you've already got this 32%, which includes a whole bunch of things. And I'm just wondering, is this 5% on top of that, or is it included in that, or is it just unnecessary for a jurisdiction that has that kind of an allocation for non-residential uses? That would include streets, parks, neighborhood uses, neighborhood scale uses, even small clinics, things like that.
I don't know if Heather or Kevin might have anything. No, not Kevin saying no. Heather?
I'm not sure that that was a question for me about the 5%, because that is in the rules. That's proposed to be added in the rules as a cap for allowing the 5% neighborhood commercial. I can clarify that we have moved beyond the 32% threshold that's in the Metro Plan, and we do a much more refined analysis of what we need for infrastructure, parks, and neighborhood commercial based on capital improvement plans and master plans and things like that. So the Metro Plan may say, we need about 32%, but we do a much more refined analysis when we're doing our UGB analysis.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments on this topic for today? If not, we will move into our wrap up. Thanks everyone again. Everyone's been active on the mural board. I know I saw people both posting and reading. That was really helpful. So if you have additional thoughts that you want to share after you reflect on today's conversation, please post those there. We have coming up, our next contact meeting is Thursday, July 17th. And we'll be looking at version 2 of the land use efficiency measures. We have a second topic there looking at, I don't know if anyone from staff wants to comment on that, but considerations for critical path facilitation for incorporation. I don't know that I have anything else to add to that one. And then RAC is, I'll go to you in a second, Maddie. RAC is on July 9th. And what are we talking about? Are we talking about land use efficiency measures there as well?
Can answer both questions, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie.
Let's start with the RAC meeting, because it's more current in our calendar.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take a topic related to how land use efficiency measures show up in each of the Goal 10 analyses, or the steps of Goal 10, as a way to tie together some of the work that was done last year and adopted by our Land Conservation and Development Commission in December of 24, and kind of bring that together with some of the work that has been proposed so far by this group, focused on and through the lens of land use efficiency measures, how they show up. Then on the 17th, we'll talk, as Steve alluded, about the same topic, but in more specificity. So we'll take a much broader conversation that we'll have with our Rules Advisory Committee and bring it down to some really specific questions that we'll have for you all. Some of those have to do with the application of land use efficiency measures, the satisfactory level of land use efficiency measures that cities take, among other topics. And I added an element related specifically to how maybe us all collectively thinking about, and this is not a version 2, this would be a new concept, about how cities engage with certain properties, and how to spread the resources appropriately, so that so that communities are engaging with properties that have somewhat of a multiplier effect opportunity. So critical path properties being those that, in order for the rest of the area that might be contiguous to, say, the city limits of a city, how does the city engage specifically with those properties that might be required to support the extension of a certain utility, or something that really holds back the likelihood of development of the rest of an area, basin of your urban growth boundary or something similar. Many communities have call this or talk about this in the context of public-private partnerships, but we'll talk a little bit more about how a city might refine how they use that tool, and how cities and utility districts engage with individual opportunities, either through a mandate from the housing production strategy elements or contextualized housing need, or from the capacity analysis side of our Goal 10 process. That's just a preview. I'd be happy to provide a lot more detail in the memo and accompanying materials you'll see before that meeting on the 17th.
Thanks, Maddie. Thanks for the clarity there. And thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. I hope you enjoy a fun and relaxing long weekend and holiday. And we'll see you again in a few weeks. Thanks so much.
Thank you.